Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel all about migration. So what we're going to do today is to continue with our country series, and today we're going to look specifically at the Philippines, a country that is quite well known around the world for migration, especially for out-migration in more modern times. So I'm going to start now with the history of migration in the Philippines. Later, though, in other videos, I will cover migration policy and the current day situation with regard to migration in the Philippines. So if you're interested in that, please have a look in the description below, and I will also link them up here in these cards. So let's just jump right in and get started now. I want to cover 4 periods in Filipino migration history. The first period that I'm going to look at looks really at the period of Spanish colonization between 1565 and 1898. Now, during this period, already the Philippines has had a long history of emigration to the Americas. So during Spanish colonization, some Filipinos traveled to Mexico and to the US through the Galilean trade, using the Manilan-Acapulco trade route. Now, from this trade, then we had the Filipinos actually reaching the Americas, and some of these Filipino seafarers started settlements in the United States. There's a quite famous original settlement known as the Manila Village in Louisiana, but also people sometimes worked as fruit pickers in California during this period. By 1938, there were 200 inhabitants of the Manila Village. But many of these old settlements of Filipinos in the United States were destroyed between 1915 and 1965 because of hurricanes and are no longer inhabited in those areas today. Now, if we turn to the second period in Filipino migration, this is really a period between 1898 and 1946. And that's because Philippines became a U.S. colony in 1898 following the Spanish-American War. So the first workers then from the Philippines arrived in 1906 to work on sugarcane and pineapple plantations in Hawaii. Mostly single men traveled to the U.S. to work in agriculture and fishing in California, Oregon, and Washington. Approximately between 120,000 and 150,000 Filipino workers came to America between 1906 and 1934, mostly to Hawaii. Smaller numbers of people, though, migrated for educational purposes, and they generally migrated on government schemes as missionaries or funded by rich families. And because at this time the Philippines was a colony of the United States, the migration from the Philippines to the US was really considered more internal migration, and it was easy to travel, or more easy to travel to the US freely during this time, but Filipinos didn't have access to US citizenship at this time. Then moving on to the third period, this is really between 1946 and 1974. There was the Philippine Independence Act of 1934, which provided for granting the Filipino independence or Philippine independence in 10 years' time. But it also only allowed for 50 visas per year for Filipinos to the United States. So during this period, then, we saw a drastic decrease in migration to the United States. However, World War II really changed quite a lot with regard to Filipino migration. So as a result of World War II, between 1946 and the mid-1960s, about 10,000 to 12,000 Filipinos came to Hawaii as workers, military personnel, and war brides also. The US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand also dismantled their pro-European immigration policies in the 1960s, especially with a lot of civil rights reforms, and then immigration from the Philippines to all of these countries grew. So really from the 1960s on, we saw an increase in this migration from the Philippines. Now, if we look at more modern day migration from the Philippines, this is our fourth period where the Philippines really has become a major labor exporting country, which started in the early to mid 70s. So this is really looking now at the period from around 1974 to the present. So in the 1970s, there were several reasons why people would perhaps want to leave the country. Things like unemployment, which was also made worse by the oil crisis, low wages, high population growth, political instability. These were all reasons that made people want to leave the country. But at the same time, there were a number of factors, what you could say, pulling people also to other countries like the Gulf countries. So the Gulf countries started ambitious infrastructure projects, as well as there was need for labor in other countries. Okay, so all of these factors, reasons to enter another country, kind of culminated in a framework for what became the government's overseas employment program, which was established with the passage of the Labor Code of the Philippines in 1974. And this is really when the Philippines This is really when the Philippines became a labor exporting country. Within this code, the Labor Code of the Philippines of 1974, there was a system for recruitment agencies and placement fees. And at this time also, this was originally considered a temporary situation. But what we see is that this is still flourishing today, with the Philippines being one of the major labor exporting countries in the world. So if you have a look here at this graph, which shows the annual deployment of overseas Filipino workers between 1975 and 2015, you can see that this had a very clear upward trending line and has been increasing over time with a few dips here and there, but in general, this has been increasing dramatically. So here you can also see a difference between land-based and sea-based workers, because Filipinos are also known for having very good seafarers that fly under the flags of many different countries. And you can see here that seafarers have also been increasing over time, but the larger growth over time has really been in land-based overseas workers. And these are things like Filipino nurses, Filipinos working in other health services, but also working quite a lot in domestic work. Of course, also in other jobs, but those are some of the large sectors where Filipinos are very much based nowadays. So I hope that just gives you a quick overview of the history of migration from the Philippines. What we will do next in other videos is to look at the current situation of migration in the Philippines, and also to look at the history of migration policy in the Philippines. So have a look out for those. If you liked this video, if it was helpful, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos, and please feel free to share this with other people who you think might find it useful. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.